Imagine you're standing on the Rialto dock in the year 1350. In front of you, the Grand Canal shimmers under the northern Italian sun. You see galleys loaded to the brim arriving from the other side of the world, packed with pepper, nutmeg, silk, cinnamon, gold. The merchants wear clothes no European king could afford. The palaces lining the canal are so luxurious that travelers from across Europe describe them as visions from another world. You are standing in the richest city on the planet. And yet, if you step a little closer to the water, if you let your guard down for just a second and breathe in, the smell that hits you in the face is not the smell of spices. It is the smell of death. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell. Every week, we reconstruct with artificial intelligence eras that official history forgot to tell you about as they really were. What you are about to see today about Venice, no textbook will ever teach you. Venice, La Serenissima, the city that for over 300 years was literally the financial center of the entire world. This is not an exaggeration. This is not poetry. It is an accounting fact. At its peak, between the 13th and 15th centuries, this city built on the mud of a lagoon in northern Italy controlled more than 60% of all the spice trade reaching Europe. 60% of the entire continent. And spices in that era were not simply cooking condiments. They were power. They were medicine. They were the exact equivalent of oil today. 1 kilogram of nutmeg grown in the islands of Indonesia, on the other side of the planet, arrived in Venice after months of travel, and its price had been multiplied by 600. 600, not by 6, by 600. A Venetian merchant with a medium-sized sack of nutmeg held in his hands more money than most European peasants would see in their entire lives. And Venice did not only sell spices. It sold absolutely everything. Silk from China, cotton from Egypt, precious stones from India, sugar from Cyprus, glass that only the city's own craftsmen knew how to make, and whose formula was so fiercely protected by the government that any master glassblower who tried to leave the city with its secrets could be executed. The Republic of Venice minted more gold coins than France and England combined. Its gold ducats were accepted as official currency throughout the Mediterranean because everyone knew they always carried exactly the same weight and the same purity. The entire world trusted Venetian gold more than the gold of any king. But there's a part of this story that nobody tells when they speak of Venetian greatness. To understand what it was really like to live in Venice during its golden age, you need to know a detail that modern tour guides prefer to leave out. The canals that today look so romantic, the very same ones gondolas glide through while tourists take their photos, in the 14th and 15th centuries were the city's sewage system. Everything, absolutely everything produced by a city of 200,000 people went directly into those canals. The latrines of the palaces connected directly to the water. The slaughterhouses poured the blood of animals into the canals. The tanners, the dyers, the butchers, the fishmongers, all of them threw their waste into the same water through which ships loaded with spices and silk navigated. No treatment system existed. There was no place where any of that waste was processed. It simply accumulated. And when the wind shifted direction, the smell from Venice's canals was so brutal that medieval travelers themselves documented it in their chronicles without a single euphemism. A Flemish diplomat who visited the city in the early 15th century wrote in his diary that on the first day, he believed he was going to fall ill simply from breathing the air near the Rialto market. So how did people survive? Through a combination of habit, resignation, and a system of values completely different from our own. Garbage was not a problem to be solved. It was simply part of the landscape, like the water and the wind. Venetians had been born into that smell. They had known it since childhood. For them, that mixture of rot, salt and spices was simply the aroma of their city, the aroma of wealth. But here comes the part that truly changes the way you understand the story. Venice was not rich in spite of that garbage. In many ways, it was rich because of it. Let me explain why. The entire Venetian economic system depended on having the largest port in Europe running at full capacity, with the greatest possible number of ships, merchants and workers in the smallest possible space. That meant overcrowding. That meant live animals in the markets. That meant the waste of 200,000 people had nowhere to go but the canals. The garbage was the price of efficiency, and Venice chose efficiency over cleanliness because efficiency generated immeasurable fortunes. Every day a ship spent less time loading, and unloading was money. Every foreign merchant who arrived at Rialto and found everything he needed without moving was money. The contamination of the canals was, literally, the operating cost of being the commercial center of the world. Now comes the detail I like most about this entire story, and I wanted to hold on to it because it explains something that goes far beyond Venice. In the year 1347, something arrived at the Italian ports that no Venetian merchant had ordered from his catalog of Oriental products. It arrived in the fleas of the rats that infested the holds of the merchant ships. It arrived invisible, nameless, with no way to identify it, and in less than 5 years, it killed between a third and half of the entire population of Europe. The Black Death. And Venice, precisely because it was the largest port in Europe, was one of the first cities to receive it. The same trade route that brought nutmeg from Indonesia and silk from China also brought the most devastating disease in Western history. And do you know what Venice did? What it always did. It innovated. It calculated. It turned even catastrophe into a system. Venice was the first city in the world to invent quarantine. The word itself comes from the Italian quarantina, 40 days. The government of La Serenissima ordered that every ship coming from infected areas had to remain anchored at a distance from the port for 40 days before any crew member or cargo could disembark. If after 40 days no one had fallen ill, access was permitted. It was empirical, brutal in its simplicity, and turned out to be, centuries before bacteriology existed, one of the most effective public health measures humanity had ever invented. A city that lived in contaminated canals and markets full of rats was the same city that created the world's first modern sanitary protocol. Business continued. The Black Death killed more than half of Venice's population in 1348, 120,000 people, and yet by 1380, barely 30 years later, the city had already recovered its dominant position in Mediterranean trade. Not even the worst epidemic in European history could stop the Venetian economic machine for more than 3 decades. That tells you everything you need to know about the mentality of this city. Tell me in the comments, did you know the word quarantine comes from Venice? Or is there something in this story that surprised you especially? I love reading your responses because many times you tell me facts I did not even know myself. And sometimes those comments become the next video. Now, if you thought the contaminated canals and the Black Death were the darkest aspects of Venetian wealth, wait, because there is something that official history rarely mentions when it talks about gold ducats and Oriental spices. Venice built part of its fortune on one of the most brutal businesses of the Middle Ages, the trade in human beings. From its earliest centuries of existence, even before controlling the spice routes, Venice was one of the main centers of the slave trade in Europe. Venetian merchants bought people on the shores of the Black Sea, in the steppes of Eastern Europe, on the coasts of the Caucasus, and sold them to the sultans and sheiks of the Arab world. So widespread was this trade that historians have traced its footprint in language itself. Many of the enslaved people who passed through Venice came from the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, and it was precisely from their name, Slav, that the medieval Latin word sclavus emerged, which over time became the word esclavo in Spanish, schiavo in Italian, and slave in English. The word we use today to describe slavery in any European language carries inside it, hidden, the memory of those Venetian trade routes. And the government did not merely permit it, it regulated it, it taxed it, it turned it into a source of fiscal revenue like any other commercial product. The same authorities who built the Basilica of San Marco with gold mosaics, who commissioned the world's greatest artists to decorate the Doge's palace, were the same ones collecting a percentage on every human being sold at the docks of Rialto. But it does not stop there, because Venice was also, by far, the sex capital of all of medieval Europe. At its peak, with a population of 170,000 inhabitants, it is estimated that more than 11,000 women practiced prostitution officially, registered and supervised by the Republic's own government. The government did not merely tolerate it. In the 14th century, it built an entire neighborhood dedicated exclusively to this trade, known as the Castelletto, and it did so with completely pragmatic logic. Thousands of sailors arrived at port after months at sea, and La Serenissima preferred to channel their energies in an orderly way rather than risk chaos in the streets. Regulated prostitution was, literally, a public policy tool for maintaining social order in the world's busiest port. The high-class Venetian courtesans, known as Cortigini Onest, were figures of fascinating complexity. They were not simply women who sold their company. They were intellectuals. Many spoke several languages. They wrote poetry. They debated philosophy. They received artists, philosophers, ambassadors, and kings in their salons. One of the most celebrated, Veronica Franco, who lived in the 16th century when Venetian splendor was already beginning to decline, was so recognized as a poet and writer that King Henry III of France personally requested to meet her during his visit to the city. Franco went on to dedicate part of her personal fortune to creating a hospice for abandoned and homeless women in Venice, decades before any European government had thought to do anything similar. A Venetian courtesan inventing social welfare while the nobles of Europe had not even conceived of the concept. And while all of this was happening upstairs, in the noble floors of the great palaces along the Grand Canal, the Venetian aristocracy lived in a way no European king could match. The dinners of the great merchants lasted for hours. Dozens of courses, wines from every region of the Mediterranean, perfumes imported from Arabia, fabrics that in the rest of Europe were only seen on the altars of the wealthiest churches, and all of that abundance surrounded, literally, by the smell of the canals rising through the windows every time the tide changed. Luxury and rot coexisting meters apart, separated only by architecture and money. The doctors of Venice in that era had a theory about why people fell ill. They knew nothing about bacteria, viruses, or germs. They believed diseases traveled through the air, specifically through bad air, through miasmas, as they were called. And it is a perfect irony. They were right in identifying the problem. The canals and the markets full of rot were effectively the source of the diseases, but the explanation they gave themselves was completely wrong. To protect themselves from those miasmas, doctors wore masks with a long bird beak filled with aromatic herbs. Those masks that today we see at Venice's carnivals as a picturesque tourist curiosity, as decoration for costume parties, were in their origin the medieval equivalent of a biological protection respirator. The Venetian Carnival, that festival of masks and costumes the entire world knows as a symbol of luxury and elegance, was born in a city that needed its doctors to go to work covered from head to toe to avoid dying from what came out of its own canals. The greatness of Venice was real. The palaces were real. The gold was real. The commercial intelligence, the diplomatic capacity, the financial innovation of this city that invented modern banking, maritime insurance, bills of exchange, all of that was real and changed forever the way the Western world does business. But that greatness did not come alone. It came wrapped in slave labor, in contaminated canals, in devastating epidemics, in an inequality so brutal that the very same canals that carried the silk of the patricians also dragged the corpses of the poor during the years of plague. And there lies the truth that no postcard of Venice ever tells you. The richest city in the medieval world was not a dream. It was a business, and like every great business of its era, it had a balance sheet that included things nobody wanted to look at too closely, just as nobody wanted to lean too far over the canals in the summer months. The garbage was worth more than the gold because without that garbage, without that dirty, loud, contaminated, and deadly machine running at full capacity, there was no gold. There never was. If you made it this far, I really want to know which part of the story hit you hardest. The Venetian quarantine, the origin of the word slave, the intellectual courtesans? Leave it in the comments. And if you know someone who is passionate about real history, the kind that does not appear in textbooks, share this video with that person right now. The YouTube algorithm needs us to help carry this content to more people. And every time you share or leave a comment, you are doing exactly that. See you in the next video.